You think you know someone after 60 years, right? 60 years of shared laughter, whispered secrets, big wins, and, well, too many losses to count. I sure did. I thought I knew Arthur better than I knew myself. But then came our final conversation, just a few hours, really, when you think about 6 whole decades. And in those hours, he said something that didn't just surprise me. It pretty much unraveled everything I thought I understood about him, about us, and even about the lives we'd lived side by side. It was like a lifetime's lesson wrapped up in a quiet goodbye. 60 years. It's a lifetime, isn't it? For some, even more. For Arthur and me, that's how long we'd really known each other. We met as boys, all scabby knees and wild dreams, in a world that feels kind of sepia-toned in my memory now. He was a new kid, a bit shy, with these eyes that just seemed to take everything in real quiet like. I was, well, the opposite. Loud, always in the middle of things, probably a bit of a show-off, if I'm being honest. But something just clicked. Maybe it was that we both loved building these ridiculously rickety go-karts, or maybe it was this unspoken thing that we both felt a little out of step with the other boys our age. Whatever it was, it stuck. Through school, worrying about exams, and even more about asking girls to dance. Through our first fumbling attempts at being adults, jobs, bills, and realizing life wasn't exactly the grand adventure we'd drawn up in crayon. Arthur was there, and I was there for him. We weren't the kind of friends who had to talk every single day. Weeks, sometimes months would go by, especially when careers and families pulled us in different directions for a while. But there was always this invisible thread, a tether that meant when we did reconnect, it was like no time had passed at all. We just slipped back into our old rhythm, the easy banter, the comfortable silences. He knew my tells, the little quiver in my voice when I was trying to be brave but was scared stiff, the way I'd rub the back of my neck when I was truly stumped. And I knew the way his left eyebrow would go up just a tiny bit when he was skeptical, that almost silent sigh when he was carrying a worry he wasn't ready to talk about yet. I really thought I had Arthur all figured out, his loyalty solid as a rock, his quiet generosity, never asked for a thank you, even his sometimes frustrating common sense that often saved me from my own crazier ideas. We'd seen each other through marriages, the births of our kids, and the bittersweet feeling of watching those kids grow up and fly the nest. We'd mourned parents together, celebrated small wins, and navigated the usual bumps in the road life throws at you. He was the best man at my wedding. I gave the eulogy at his mother's funeral. These are the milestones, the signposts of a journey shared. Our friendship, like so many that ripen over decades, had become this bedrock of support, a huge part of who I was. I leaned on it probably more than I ever consciously admitted. I believed, with a certainty that now feels almost foolish, that there were no hidden rooms in Arthur's heart, no secret corners in his soul, at least not from me. I figured we'd laid all our cards on the table over all those cups of coffee, those long walks, and those late-night calls when the world felt too heavy. The years had been good to us in many ways, but they also brought the inevitable slowing down, the aches and pains that become your daily companions, the growing feeling that the road ahead was maybe shorter than the one behind. Arthur had a few health scares in the years before, battles he fought with that quiet strength of his. Each one was a sharp reminder of how fragile life is, and it pulled us, if that was even possible, even closer. We didn't shy away from the big stuff life, death, regrets, and what we'd leave behind. Or so I thought. I was convinced we'd covered it all, that we completely understood each other. That was my biggest mistake. Thinking that knowing someone for a long time means you know them through and through. The truth is, people are like these vast, intricate landscapes. Sometimes, even after a lifetime of exploring, there are still uncharted corners, hidden valleys that only show themselves when the light is just right, or maybe when the shadows are about to fall. The call wasn't a total shock. Arthur hadn't been well for a while. It wasn't one big dramatic illness, but more of a slow, quiet fading of the vibrant guy I'd always known. His energy slipped, his voice on the phone got softer, and our walks got shorter, eventually turning into chats on his sun porch, with him wrapped in a blanket even on milder days. We both knew, without saying it, that our time for sharing stories was becoming more precious with every day that passed. His wife, Sareha, wonderful woman, his rock for over 50 years, was the one who called. Her voice was strained, trying to be steady, but I could hear the tremor. "He's been asking for you, Tom," she said. He's he's been very insistent today." There was an urgency in her tone I hadn't heard before, a kind of quiet surrender that sent a chill right through me, even though it was a warm spring morning. Arthur wasn't one for making a fuss. If he was insistent, it meant something. It meant this was big. Deep down, I think I knew what this summons really meant. It wasn't just a request for a visit, it felt more like a call to witness something, to be there for a chapter that was closing. I drove over to their house, a place so full of memories for me. Every corner seemed to echo with old laughter, debates, and comfortable silences. The drive itself is a bit of a blur, familiar streets that suddenly felt different, heavy with a somber meaning. My mind raced, replaying decades of friendship, searching for, I don't even know what, reassurance, a sign that this wasn't what it felt like. Sarah met me at the door. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a brave smile. "Thanks for coming so quickly, Tom. He's been looking forward to it." Her hand trembled a little as she led me through to the sun porch, Arthur's favorite room. It was bright, filled with plants Sarah tended so well, and smelled of old books and brewing tea. And there he was, propped up in his comfy armchair, a woolen blanket tucked around his legs. He looked out at the garden he'd cared for so meticulously for years. He looked frail, there was no denying it. The spark that always danced in his eyes was dimmer, but it was still there, especially when he turned his head slowly and saw me. "Tom," he said, his voice just a whisper, but his smile, though faint, was pure Arthur. "Glad you made it, old friend." There was no pretending, no trying to downplay how serious things were. We were past all that. The air was thick with unspoken truths, with a shared understanding that this conversation was different. This wasn't just another catch-up. This felt like a final meeting, something sacred. It was clear. This was probably our last chance for this kind of deep, personal talk. I pulled up a chair beside him, close enough so we could speak quietly, close enough that I could offer a hand if he needed it. Sarah brought us tea. Her movements quiet, efficient, her presence a comforting anchor in the room before she quietly slipped out, leaving us to our words, to our history. "How are you really, Arthur?" I asked. It was a question we'd asked each other 1,000 times, but today it carried an incredible weight. He looked out at the garden for a long moment, a faint smile on his lips. "Tired, Tom?" he finally said, his gaze meeting mine. "Very tired, but peaceful in a strange sort of way." Peaceful, I clung to that word right then. What set off this final, profound exchange wasn't some dramatic event, but the quiet, insistent pull of a soul getting ready for a different kind of journey, and his need, his wish, to share something important before he left. It was the culmination of a lifetime of friendship, now squeezed into these precious, fleeting moments. Sitting there with Arthur, the sun casting long shadows across the room, the years just seemed to fold in on themselves. It wasn't just about that moment, it was about the 60 years that had led us there. The build-up to our final talk wasn't a series of dramatic events, but more like the steady accumulation of shared experiences, countless small moments that had woven together the rich tapestry of our friendship. "Remember that time?" I started, trying to bring a little lightness into the room. When we tried to build that ridiculous treehouse in your parents' backyard, the one that leaned so far to the left, we were convinced it would end up in Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses? Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound, but his eyes twinkled with the memory. And it did, didn't it? Or at least a good chunk of it. Your hammer, if I recall. My hammer, your design. I shot back, and for a few precious minutes, we were boys again, covered in sawdust and youthful hope. We talked about that disastrous camping trip where it rained for 3 solid days, and all we had to eat was a bag of soggy marshmallows and an even soggier loaf of bread. We reminisced about our first cars. Mine, a temperamental old thing that coughed more than it ran. His, a surprisingly sleek second-hand convertible he'd polished till it gleamed. Sharing old stories like that, laughing over memories, it felt so natural, so right. Each story was like adding another brushstroke to this masterpiece we hadn't even realized we were painting. We remembered how we thought we could solve all the world's problems over a pint. Those deep philosophical discussions that usually ended with us agreeing that another slice of pizza was probably the most pressing answer. I remembered how Arthur had been there for me, unwavering, when my first big business idea crashed and burned. I'd been devastated, convinced I was a total failure. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy fixes. He just sat with me for hours, mostly in silence, letting me get all my frustration and disappointment out. And then quietly, he reminded me of other tough times I'd overcome, not by downplaying my pain, but by showing me my own strength, reflected in his eyes. His belief in me right then was a lifeline, and I tried to be the same for him. When he lost his father, a man he deeply admired but also had a complicated relationship with, I was there. We didn't talk much about his dad directly, but we talked about legacies, about the things fathers pass on to their sons, both the good and the difficult. It was in those moments when we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, to be less than perfect, that our bond really deepened. As we sat there, the afternoon sun starting to fade, our conversation wasn't just a highlight reel of happy times. We touched on regrets too, not in a sad, mopey way, but with the kind of gentle honesty that comes when you no longer feel you have to impress anyone or defend yourself. He talked about wishing he'd traveled more when he was younger, about words he'd left unsaid to his own parents. I confessed my own share of mistakes, decisions I'd look back on and just wince. These weren't confessions looking for forgiveness, but more like acknowledgments of our shared imperfect humanity. I remembered how just a decade earlier, we'd had a rare but pretty big fight. It was over something silly in hindsight, a misunderstanding that blew up because we were both stressed about other things. We didn't speak for almost a month, the longest we'd ever gone. The silence was awful, like a hole ripped in my days. It was Arthur who broke it, showing up at my door with a peace offering, a ridiculously oversized, badly baked cake. We didn't even need to say sorry. The awkwardness just melted away as we laughed at his baking disaster. That experience, though tough at the time, taught me how resilient our friendship was, but also how important it is not to let pride get in the way of connection. Throughout our friendship, Arthur had always been the more thoughtful one. While I might charge ahead, he'd pause, think things over, and often see angles I'd completely missed. His wisdom wasn't loud or preachy. It came in quiet observations, thoughtful questions that kind of guided me to my own answers. He was, in so many ways, my true north. The more we talked, drifting through the landscape of our shared past, the more I felt that familiar comfort, that feeling of being completely understood. The depth of our friendship, built over 60 years, was such a huge part of me. I was keenly aware of the clock ticking, the light fading, but in those moments of shared memory, there was a timeless quality, a feeling that our connection was something that went beyond the ordinary passage of days. He had always been the keeper of so many of my stories, just as I was of his. I believed I knew the rhythm of his thoughts, the map of his heart. The idea that there was something fundamental, something life-changing that I had missed simply hadn't crossed my mind, not yet. The feeling that he was leading up to something important, given why he'd insisted I come, was building subtly, an undercurrent to the gentle flow of our reminiscing. The stage was being set not for some grand announcement, but for a quiet truth that would hit me with the force of a thunderclap. The sun had dipped lower, painting the room in shades of orange and purple. A comfortable silence settled between us, the kind that comes from long familiarity, where words aren't always needed. Arthur had been quiet for a bit, his gaze fixed on a fading photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of the two of us, much younger, arms slung around each other, grinning like idiots after winning a local fishing competition with a laughably small trout. I watched him, my heart a strange mix of warmth from our shared memories and a growing, undefinable ache. The pace of our conversation had naturally slowed. His breaths were shallower, and I sensed he was gathering what little energy he had left for something specific. This was it, I felt. The real reason he'd asked me to come. He turned his head slowly. His eyes, though weary, held a deep clarity. "Tom," he began, his voice barely a whisper, making me lean in closer. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long, long time ago." My breath caught. What on earth could it be? After 60 years, what secret could Arthur, my most straightforward friend, possibly have kept hidden? My mind raced through a dozen wild ideas, none of which felt right. He paused, took a slow, deliberate breath, and then he said the words that would change everything I thought I knew about him, about us. "You know," he started, a faint, almost sad smile on his lips. "All those years, all those times, I seemed so steady, so practical, so unfazed by your crazier schemes or whatever life threw at us." I nodded, confused. "Yeah, that was you, Arthur. Solid as a rock. That was the man I knew, the one who calmly navigated any chaos, who always seemed to have it all figured out." He let out a soft, dry chuckle. "Solid, yes, but often terrified." I blinked. "Terrified? Arthur, you? What are you talking about?" That wasn't a word I ever associated with him. Not ever. "Terrified," he repeated, his voice gaining a tiny bit more strength, as if just saying it out loud was freeing. "So many times, Tom. When you were starting that first risky business, I was terrified for you, for your family. When my diagnosis came, I was terrified. But more than that, all through life, there was this undercurrent, a fear of not being good enough, of failing, of letting people down, especially you and Sarah." I just stared at him, speechless. Arthur, my calm, practical, seemingly fearless friend, the one who had always been my anchor in every storm, admitting he was terrified? It felt like the ground had just tilted under my feet. "But you never showed it," I finally managed, my voice full of shock. "You were always so composed, so sure of yourself." "Ah, the certainty," he said, a wistful look in his eyes. "That was the part I worked hardest on, Tom. I thought it was what everyone needed from me. Strength, composure. I saw how much you and others seemed to rely on that image of me. So I cultivated it, I practiced it. It became a role I played. And over the years, it got so ingrained, I sometimes almost convinced myself." He paused again, his gaze drifting to his hands, now frail and thin, resting on the blanket. "The truth is, Tom, so much of what you saw as my natural steadiness was a conscious act of will, a decision I made every single day. It wasn't that I didn't feel the same anxieties, the same uncertainties as everyone else maybe. Even more so, it was that I felt I couldn't show them. I thought it would be a burden to you, to Sarah, and to the kids. A wave of emotions washed over me, surprise definitely, but also this deep, aching sadness. Sadness for the burden he'd carried alone for so long, sadness for my own blindness. How had I, his closest friend for 6 decades, missed something so huge about his inner life? Arthur, I said, my voice thick with emotion, why didn't you ever, why didn't you tell me? We shared everything. I would have understood. I trailed off, not sure what I would have done, but knowing I would have wanted to. He reached out a trembling hand and placed it on my arm. His touch was light, but it carried the weight of all those years. Because, old friend, he said softly, in a way, your belief in my strength gave me strength. Your seeing me as steady helped me be steady, or at least to act the part convincingly enough. And maybe, he added, a hint of a wry smile, maybe I was too proud to admit that the rock sometimes felt like it was crumbling from the inside. He continued, and it wasn't a lie, not really. There were moments of genuine calm, of true certainty, but they were often hard-won. The lesson, Tom, if there is one in all this rambling of an old man, is that what people show the world, it's rarely the whole story. Even with those we love most, those we think we know inside and out, there are always hidden battles, quiet anxieties. The surface can be so deceptive. The room was silent for a long moment, just the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. His words hung in the air, simple, direct, yet they shattered so much. This was it, the revelation that he, my pillar of calm, had lived with this persistent, hidden fear, a carefully managed persona that I had accepted without a single question. The emotional impact was immense, a sudden rewriting of 60 years of interactions. Every memory, every piece of advice he'd given, and every calm moment in a crisis were now seen in a new, more complex, more human light. I never knew, Arthur, I whispered, the rawness of my surprise still fresh. I truly never knew. He squeezed my arm gently. I know you didn't, Tom, and that's okay. Perhaps it was something I could only admit now, at the very end, when there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to maintain. His gaze was direct, holding mine, full of a lifetime of unspoken truths, finally given voice. Don't ever assume you know everything about someone, Tom, not even after 60 years. People are deeper, more complex, and often more fragile than we let ourselves see. Arthur's words didn't just hang in the air. They soaked into me and started to rearrange the very furniture of my mind. My first reaction was this profound sense of, well, being adrift. It was as if I'd been looking at a familiar painting for 60 years, admiring its lines and colors, only to be told the artist had used an entirely different set of paints hidden beneath what I could see. In the hours and days that followed our conversation, Arthur passed away peacefully 2 days later. With Sarah and his children by his side, his revelation just replayed itself over and over in my head. The initial shock slowly gave way to this complicated mix of feelings. There was sorrow, a deep, aching grief, not just because he was gone, but for the burden he'd carried in silence. This sense of loss felt even bigger because I realized that even in our deep friendship, there had been a part of him I hadn't truly reached, or maybe hadn't been sharp enough to see. I found myself going over countless memories, looking at them through this new lens. That time he'd calmly talked me out of a terrible investment. Was his calm, genuine certainty, or was it this monumental act of will, masking his own worries about my potential ruin? When his company went through that massive shakeup and his job was on the line, he'd put on such a brave, practical face. He'd joked about early retirement, about finally having time for his garden. Now, I wondered about the sleepless nights, the fear he must have hidden behind that stoic front, This new information didn't make Arthur seem smaller in my eyes. If anything, it made his strength seem even greater, but it was a different kind of strength. Not the effortless, natural calm I had always seen, but a strength born of deliberate effort, of resilience in the face of hidden turmoil. It was the strength of someone who felt fear but chose again and again to act with courage and think of others. It was, in its own way, far more heroic. Understanding what his words really meant was a slow process. It involved painfully stripping away my own assumptions. I had prided myself on knowing Arthur, on our deep, almost telepathic connection. To realize I had missed such a huge part of his inner life was humbling, to say the least. It made me question my own observation skills, my own ability to truly empathize. Had I been too quick to just accept the surface? Too reliant on the persona he presented? His last words forced me to face the fact that you can never fully know another person. Even in the closest, longest relationships, there's always this private core, a landscape others can't see. We build our understanding of people based on what they choose to show us, what we're capable of seeing, and sometimes what we want. My author, the unshakable rock, was a picture I had partly helped create, a role I had needed him to play, just as he had felt the need to play it. This revelation also changed how I saw our friendship. It wasn't the simple, totally transparent bond I'd imagined. It was more complex, more nuanced, and in some ways more touching. It was a friendship where one partner had quietly carried an extra weight, not to deceive, but maybe out of love, out of a desire to protect, or simply because he didn't know any other way to be. The life-altering lesson started to become clear. It wasn't just about Arthur, it was about everyone. It was about the masks we all wear, the silent battles fought behind smiling faces or composed exteriors. His final gift to me was an insight into the profound, often invisible courage of everyday life. It was a call to look deeper, to listen more attentively, not just to the words spoken, but to the silences, to the subtle clues that might hint at a hidden struggle or a carefully guarded vulnerability. The grief for Arthur was intense, the kind of unique sorrow that comes from losing a friend who's been a constant for most of your life. But mixed in with that grief was this strange sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his final act of trust, for sharing this intimate truth. It was a conversation that resolved something I hadn't even known was unresolved. It didn't change the love or respect I had for him, but it deepened it, made it more complete. He had, in his final hours, shown me the full measure of his humanity, not just the parts he thought I needed to see. Arthur's final words weren't just a confession. They were this profound piece of wisdom, a life lesson delivered with the quiet authority that only comes from lived experience. The understanding that settled in me after he passed, and in the years since, hasn't been some sudden light bulb moment, but more like a gradual unfolding, a continuous reshaping of how I see not only my memory of Arthur, but also my relationships with everyone around me, and even my own inner life. The biggest change has been in how I see strength. I, like a lot of people, had always equated strength with not being afraid, with being unshakably composed. Arthur taught me that true strength might often look like quiet perseverance in spite of fear. It's the courage to show up, to be reliable, to offer comfort, even when your own foundations are shaking. This understanding has made me more compassionate, I think. When I see someone appearing stoic or overly confident, I don't just take it at face value anymore. I wonder about the effort behind that front, the vulnerabilities they might be protecting. This new perspective has profoundly reshaped my memory of Arthur. I no longer see him as just my calm, practical friend. I see him as a man of immense, quiet courage who navigated his life with a hidden layer of anxiety, but never allowed it to diminish his kindness, his loyalty, or his love for the people around him. My memories of him are richer now, filled with a deeper respect and a tender understanding. The fishing trips, the shared jokes, the serious discussions, they're all still there, but now they're layered with the knowledge of the inner strength it took for him to be the Arthur I knew. It makes his friendship feel even more precious, a more deliberate and profound gift. His revelation has also changed my outlook on life and relationships in a bigger way. It's made me a more attentive listener, I hope. I try harder to hear what's not being said, to create space for others to share their vulnerabilities if they choose, without pressure. I've learned that intimacy isn't about knowing every single secret because that's just impossible. True intimacy, perhaps, is about creating a safe enough space where the most important truths can be shared, even if it takes 60 years. It's about offering grace and understanding that everyone is fighting a battle you might know nothing about. The life altering lesson is this: empathy needs humility. It needs us to admit that our understanding of others is always incomplete, always a work in progress. Arthur's final gift was to pull back the curtain on his own carefully constructed self. And in doing so, he invited me to look beyond the public faces of everyone I meet. He reminded me that the human heart is a vast and complex place, and that true connection comes not from assuming we have it all figured out, but from approaching each other with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to be surprised. Arthur's story, our story, just goes to show how important it is to keep those meaningful connections going, especially as we get older, and how valuable it is to express our emotions openly, even when it's hard. His friendship shaped me, taught me, and its lessons continue to unfold even now that he's gone. He left me with more than just memories. He left me with a new way of seeing, a legacy of understanding that still guides me. What Arthur shared with me was deeply personal, but the heart of it, that hidden strength, those unspoken anxieties, that's something we all experience, isn't it? I encourage you to think about your own closest relationships. Is there space for real vulnerability? Do you listen beyond just the words? Maybe share this story with someone you care about, or even better, take a moment to truly connect with them. Ask them, "How are you really?" And then truly listen to their answer. If this story resonated with you, perhaps you'd like to subscribe for more reflections on life, loss, and the lessons we keep learning along the way. 60 years is a long time to know someone, but Arthur's final words taught me that knowing someone isn't a destination you arrive at, but a journey you take. His hidden truth didn't make our friendship any less. It completed it, made it all the more profound. The biggest lesson wasn't just about him. It was about the quiet courage that lives in so many people, often unseen. And that, I believe, is a truth worth carrying with you.